Well, good afternoon, you all. My name is Diane Fleet. I'm Associate Director at Greenhouse 17. This is my first gig as the chair of this board meeting, so please be patient and kind. I think we have some other new faces in the room, so welcome to everybody. I know Jeff has to keep us on a bit of a tight schedule, but as always, we hope that there's lots of really good discussion and banter. I think there's always really good ideas around the table. So as much as we sometimes, I know Jeff has said in the past, he doesn't want to be the only person talking up here. So I really do hope that we have some really good conversations that occur throughout the day. But I think our first point on the agenda is roll call.
And so we call to order at 1:34. We're going to start with a roll call, and then we'll go ahead and do introductions of the individuals attending the meeting. I think it's important for us to know who's in the room. For the board roll call, I have Joy Andrade, Amanda Bryant, Chris Clark, Bruce Davis,
Present.
Diane Fleet. Janice James is excused. Kathy Ploman. Bo Revlett is parking, so he is present. Liz Sheehan.
Here.
Alicia Brannon.
Here.
TC Johnson is here. And Wella Still.
Present.
All right. And then I'm also going to ask for those who are not board members to also introduce themselves. I'll go ahead and start. I am Jeff Herron, the Homelessness Prevention Manager for LFUCG. Whichever direction we want to go from here.
I'm Dawson Fee. I'm with UK's Target 4 project.
Alicia Buras, Volunteers of America, Mid-States.
Laura Chowning, WellCare Health Plans of Kentucky.
Christina Ellison, New Beginnings Bluegrass.
Dana Barthel, Lexington Public Library.
Okay.
And last time it was because this wasn't pushed in, she said, and it worked, but this time.
Okay.
Blue.
Try pushing it around the base.
Ah, it clicked. And none. Maybe it's me. I did say the same one last time. But we got it working last time.
T.C. Johnson, Fayette County Public Schools.
Lori Clemens, Arbor Youth Services. Happy belated birthday. Sorry, Diane. Yeah.
I'm loud. You can hear me from there. David Shad, Hope Center.
Jordan Lloyd, just concerned citizen.
Vivian Gaines, Health First Bluegrass, Director of Homeless Services.
Jenny Zamora, New Life Day Center.
Devin Penn, Natalie Sisters.
Megan Talley, Nathaniel Mission.
Chris Roopsum, Lexington Police Bike Unit downtown.
I am Ben Taylor. I'm part of the police department's paramedicine unit.
Bo Revlett, HPI board.
So our next agenda item is the approval of the minutes. So can you all take a second and look at the May 10th, 2023 minutes? We'll just give a few, hopefully most of you have read it before today's meeting, but if not, just take a couple minutes and then we'll vote for approval. anyone have any discussion items that they would like to bring up? Anything that needs to be corrected? Does anybody need a little more time? It's perfect in every way. Okay, all right. May I have a motion to accept the minutes? Second?
Second.
Lots of seconds. A vote of aye to approve?
You get to ask questions, I get to make.
Any abstain? Any noes? The ayes have it, Jeff.
All right, next we'll take public and partner comments for issues on the agenda. All right, hearing none, next we would go to the Data and Systems Integration Committee report, which Joy's very, very graciously agreed to serve as our chair for this committee, although she had some other responsibilities she was finishing up. So I'm going to go ahead and give this report, and she's going to report out to us next time. So the Data and Systems Integration Committee met on April 5th at the Don Ball Campus Center. We have started to resume reports on the coordinated entry system. This was something that was a regular standing item that we had done prior to the pandemic. And then during that time period, that's something that kind of dropped off. And so we are working to get this back up and rolling. At present, we were looking at the first quarter of calendar year 2023. So we're not going to have necessarily a robust amount of data to do a lot of comparisons, but hopefully soon, as we continue this, we will have a lot more information to be able to track progress. This report's going to contain things like the number of referrals that were made, the success rate of referrals, the length of time, both between addition to the coordinated entry list and referral, as well as the length of time before housing move-in, and also examine things like the pathways through which individuals move through our system. We also did a preview of the COC's new data dashboards. Those are now live on the Lexington Homelessness website. We have 3 different data dashboards that are available, looking at different performance measures, including things like demographics, our progress towards HUD system performance measures, and other local measures. So I encourage you to check those out. Again, those are now live. We also announced that we were going to have the Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention work with Continuum of Care program recipients ahead of the upcoming competition, so we can make sure that we're taking a look at HMIS data for performance and identify any kind of issues that might be of data quality and not necessarily performance, so that those items can be corrected prior to the scoring and ranking. The ideal to be that we would not be penalizing anyone on their scoring and ranking for items that might be something like a report defect, a system glitch, a data entry error, so that we can go ahead and get that resolved. Those meetings are going to start taking place next week, and they should all be scheduled at this time. Additionally, we gave some information about the upcoming 2024 HMIS data standards update. HUD makes major updates to HMIS data standards about once every 5 years, with more minor updates in the off years. Our most significant recent update was the 2022 data standards. So this one will go into effect on October 1. Keep in mind that even though this document has been released, HUD continues to refine. We were notified this week of some changes that have already been made. And so we had a preliminary discussion around this in a HMIS user work group hosted by Marissa yesterday, July 11th, and we'll continue to provide some additional guidance as HUD moves towards a finalized version of that document. Just briefly, most of those changes are not going to be very significant for our providers. A lot of those changes are going to be things including project setup. There are going to be some changes around demographics and the tracking of coordinated entry activities. and also some changes for things like our veterans partners. Again, we'll be providing additional information, and we will have assessments within HMIS prepared to reflect these standards when they go live in October. And we'll also work with providers on things like updating sample data collection forms. We also covered some continuing business items that included some discussion around the returns to homelessness review. We also presented an updated draft of the housing triage policies and procedures, which was approved by the committee for a vote today, and made announcements regarding upcoming HMIS training and also around HMIS annual license renewal, which hopefully you've been working with Marissa on. So at this time, the next meeting will be August 2nd at the Don Ball Campus Center at 1:30. And I'm gonna move for a motion to approve the HMIS, the housing triage policies and procedures. But first, is there any discussion from the board members on that document? All right, hearing none, would there be a motion?
So moved. Delegate number 12 will second. I had to say that. It says seat 12. I second.
All right.
Don't confuse me on my first day. Don't do that to me. I was looking for C12. I was like, what is that?
All right. Any discussion? All those in favor? This is a board vote.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion passes.
Kathy just joined.
And just for the minutes, Kathy Ploman is with us in attendance. And now we'll turn things over to Liz Sheehan, Chair of the Program Performance and Evaluation Committee.
Hi, everyone. We had our committee meeting on June 21st at the Don Ball Campus Center at 1:30. We started by approving the minutes from April. That motion passed without dissent. Then we had 3 presentations. The first was from Community Action Council on their Assertive Street Outreach. They presented on their program, and then we had some discussion around outcomes for income and treatment, and how the pandemic might have affected the numbers that they were presenting that day, how income was measured, how SOR applications are very time sensitive, and how that has been a challenge. The next program that presented was the LFUCG COC Planning Grant, and Marissa did that presentation. She presented all of the data, and then the conversation, some of the conversation was around the new HMIS position that would be through the OP office, and how that we would be able to raise our data quality standards with that position, and identifying and working on gaps in our system. And then our final presentation was from Salvation Army for their Emergency Shelter for Women and Families through the Extended Social Resources Grant. Kendall Anderson presented for that. And they presented the data on who was using their programming. We had some discussion about the number of children with mental health issues that they experience, their targets for meeting, like they're setting the targets, because those were not defined in the documentation that was submitted. There was a significant number of folks in their data that had exited to other methods, and so we talked about the definition of what other methods meant. We talked about their Pathways to Hope program and the regionalism of their center and what else was available to meet the population needs within the region. We, in our public comment section for the meeting, we talked about the COC website and the new data dashboards. and adjourned our meeting shortly after. Our next meeting is August 16th at 1:30 at the Don Ball Campus Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Next, we would have a committee report for advocacy issues and programs. Bo, I'm not sure, since we didn't have time to talk before, if you need me to, I'm prepared to report out.
I could do it, but it would be incomplete, so
Either way.
why don't you go?
All right.
Thanks, Jeff.
So the Advocacy Issues and Programs Committee met on June 28th here in the third floor conference room of the Phoenix Building. We reviewed the minutes from the previous meeting. We had a pretty light agenda. Typically this time of year, we have a lot of folks that are on vacation. So for new business, we made an announcement regarding Community Action Council's ESG CV funded temporary emergency shelter program. Back in the spring, I had worked with Director Reynolds and Grants and Commissioner Lanter to look at any agencies that might have unspent funds from ESG-CV before the federal expenditure deadline of September 30th. We worked with a couple of agencies to approximate what amounts they felt they would be unable to spend, and we decided to move or reallocate those funds to Community Action Council to reopen their temporary emergency shelter program. That program will allow them to place individuals into motel as shelter and provide funding for supportive services, as well as some funding that they can assist with things like basic needs and food. So that is going to be a program that they're able to operate through August 31st. So that LFUCG has a little bit of time to process their payment and draw down the funds from HUD prior to the federal deadline. So my understanding is that at the present time, they are already at capacity for that program. They propose to do approximately 32 rooms on average. As of earlier this week, they were sitting at 37 rooms with 67 individuals being filled. If you have somebody that's appropriate for that program, I would still encourage you to refer them to Community Action Council to take an application, and they can screen those individuals based on priorities. As these are coronavirus funds, that's largely going to be looking at individuals that would have medical conditions that might make them more vulnerable, individuals with more serious mental health conditions, families with children, and it's going to target individuals who are unsheltered or have barriers to accessing other forms of shelter. Speaking with Marty, they are going to still, even though they are over that 32, if we are presented with any cases of individuals that are extremely vulnerable, where we feel like there's a very urgent situation, they're going to do their best to continue to serve those that are extremely vulnerable over the capacity that they originally anticipated. We also kind of just talked about the need for, as a system, us to communicate any kinds of issues that we're having within shelter that might impact operations, and viewing this as a system and not necessarily that we're operating in silos. We also spoke about the recommendations of the racial equity analysis, that there might be some opportunities for our shelter providers to engage in some peer learning. So we're looking at potentially putting together a calendar to do some meetings throughout the year for our shelter providers to come together and be able to support one another, and maybe be able to take some things from one shelter and apply it in another. In terms of continuing business, we continue to make progress on developing a lived experience engagement committee. We held the first meeting of that group Monday, July 10th, and are working to go ahead and develop a meeting calendar for future meetings. This is something that we're going to need to move quickly with, so that we can make sure that we would have the support of that work group to include with our continuum of care application. The COC NOFO dropped last week, and that was something that was listed as a requirement. So it's very timely that our system was already taking this step, because it will be something that will be needed for that collaborative application. Marissa Webb gave a program standards update in terms of emergency shelter standards. We are still working with the fire marshal in regards to occupancy, and we will present a new draft of that in the advocacy committee once we have that information finalized. We did, however, have a final draft of street outreach standards, which were approved by the committee and referred on to the board for a vote today. I also gave a update on our ID program for individuals experiencing homelessness. Some of the big takeaways there was that provision of the payment and an address that can be used for the individual's ID are not the only barriers. We're seeing a high number of those letters that are being issued and not redeemed with the state. So just encouraging our providers to think through ways that we can support individuals and making sure they actually get there to redeem their letter and receive their ID. For example, I know Chastity Griffin with Community Action Council has done a tremendous job when she's helped individuals go in groups. I think some other providers have started to try to replicate that. Just thinking through that sometimes there's steps like transportation or even just follow-up contact from a case manager to check in that would really benefit individuals and making sure they get to that end goal. Also for me, in terms of accounting, if we have a big gap between the number of letters that I've committed and those that are being redeemed, it makes it really difficult for me to have an accurate sense of the funds that are remaining, and I don't want to shut off someone's access. But I also don't want to get to a point where we're unable to issue new letters because we have a lot of funds tied up in letters that are not yet redeemed. So just some thoughts to keep in mind. The next meeting of that committee is going to be on August 23rd, and that will be here in the third floor conference room of the Phoenix building. So to go back to the street outreach standards at this time, is there any discussion from the board on that document? Hearing none, would there be a motion to approve?
So moved.
I'll second.
Thank you, Bruce. Again, any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion passes. All right, and even though we said I wasn't going to talk the whole time, here I am talking the whole time. I'm going to move along to the encampment SOPs and review report. I'm going to start with a quick note. Last time, Bo, I know that you had requested that we would present some cumulative information regarding things like the cost as well as the number of individuals that accepted assistance and might have moved into permanent housing and those that declined. Just due to kind of the timeline of things, I was on vacation last week and the packet had to be prepared a week in advance, and with LFUCG's end of fiscal year closeout process, I didn't have enough time to send out the packet on schedule and also include that information. However, I'm going to be giving my report to council in August, and so I plan to have that prepared within the next month, and so the next time around I will provide that more cumulative information. For this meeting, we did not have a lot of encampments to report on. We just had 2 locations. One was at Malibu Drive and New Circle Road. I'd like to point out that this one is technically state property. We were notified via Councilmember Legree's office on June 5th. On June 6th, we were able to assess that property. No contact was made, and there was no signs of active encampment, although there was clearly some trash and debris that needed to be addressed. We continued to make attempts. Some of this was on private property as well, so communicating with the private property owner and looking at the locations where debris had been found, making several attempts at contact. Since it it was state property and private property, typically that would not involve a notice, especially if there was no sign of an active encampment. We got environmental services to agree to clear this because the state presently does not have any vendors that they can utilize for that purpose. So that was cleaned and removed on June 13th at a cost of $300. The private property owner has also addressed the debris on their property and done some things with their landscaping to try to mitigate any future issues. Location number 2 was going to be the Man of War Bridge. This is a emphasis area listed on LFUCG's website. As such, technically, we would not need to provide notice to individuals. This was notified to us on June 20th from Environmental Services. They had a contractor who was trying to complete some mowing and came across the individuals. We quickly had street outreach engage the individuals. Both were receptive to services and relocated to emergency shelter and are in the process of working towards permanent housing. There was no notice posted for this, again, as an emphasis area, and since the individuals immediately relocated to shelter, the cost of cleanup for this was $2,000 and was completed on June 25th. Any questions regarding the encampment report?
Jeff, could I ask you just, as I recall, we're not exactly specific where these encampments are, but the Man of War Bridge, Man of War's relatively lengthy. What general area?
So that's going to be in the Nicholsville Road area near the Lowe's. Now that one, there's going to be a very clear information as to the location of, since it's an emphasis area, we are required by our SOP to keep those listed on LFUCG's website and to maintain no more than 10 emphasis areas at any time. I believe at present we have either 4 or 5 of those.
Thank you. Thank you.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the current SOPs for state property, like location 1, there's nothing, like we don't have to follow the same processor on state property, is that right?
So technically it would be treated the same as private property. Now if LFUCG is going to ultimately have an MOU where we would be responsible for that, then we would follow the same process. But we follow the SOP process for properties that either we own and control or those that we would have the authority through an MOU.
Okay, thank you.
In this case, the reason that we would not have moved to go ahead and do it, even though it's technically state property and we don't presently have that MOU for that, is that there was no sign of an active encampment, that it was just litter or debris that was found with numerous attempts at contact, confirming nobody was living there, no personal belongings. We did not feel it was needed to go ahead and post notice. All right, moving on to the director's report. First, just a update on the budget. The Innovative and Sustainable Solutions Fund primarily just at present is providing the match for the COC coordinator position. The major updates are going to be around the funds that moved on to ARPA for fiscal years 22, 23, and 24. Most of our funds for fiscal year 22 are closed or in the process of being closed out. Community Action Council has expended all of their fiscal year 22 funds. The project with Mountain Comprehensive Care Center for intensive case management is closed already. The PAYE program is continuing, still behind on spend down with a little bit of money left in their 22 funds, and then would have their additional funds in 23. HMIS subsidy has already been paid out. Medical respite is already fully expended. Our racial equity analysis is completed. That's where you're going to see a highlighted amount of just over $32,000. That is an amount that we would have available to reallocate for other purposes. Funds for winter weather overflow shelter have been expended. And at the time of this report, we had spent about $200 out of the $1,200 that were marked for state ID assistance. In fiscal year 23, Community Action Council has expended the majority of their funding, and the payee program is authorized to go ahead and operate through fiscal year 24 since they have funds remaining. Our HMIS subsidy for 23 has already been paid. Our work with Untold Content was scheduled to come to an end in June. We are in the process of spending out the final amounts with them. That included things like helping us get those data dashboards launched and a few more updates to our website and some social media advertising. We should be closing that project in full later this month. And we are in the process of the development of the onboarding curriculum for frontline staff. And of course, we had spent a little bit of money to work with a grant consultant on our supplemental NOFO application. So keep in mind that because of the way that some of the purchase orders were entered, you're going to see on 22 that we have a significant balance. And I would just like to say that that is not fully, that 74,000 that is unallocated is actually the 74,000 that we are short on fiscal year 23. So basically we break even. The amounts that we would have left to reallocate are going to be the 32,342 from the racial equity analysis and the 598 from our fiscal year 23 HMIS subsidy. For fiscal year 24, some of these RFPs are still in process. The RFP that is working to move under agreement right now is the funding for Street Outreach 3.0, which is being awarded to the Hope Center. That's going through council this week and should have a tentative start date of August 1st. And so we still have quite a bit of our 24 funds to really be fully allocated. Then for the ARPA funds that were allocated directly to Mountain Comprehensive Care Center for the Transition in Place program, as of the time of this report, they had spent a little over $82,000 of the $1 million that was awarded. That program actually has been closed out, and we're going to be looking at reallocating that money to other programming within the homelessness space. Any questions on the financial report? All right.
I do have a question. The last one you said that was the Mountain Comp program?
Yes.
It's closed out?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Do we have thoughts on what we're going to do with that remaining balance?
So we're still working to look at that. One thing is Commissioner Lanter has pulled together a committee to reimagine our winter weather response. And so that's one potential avenue that we might pursue in order to be able to fund a little bit more of a robust response. Presently, one of the things that we're looking at is potentially having a season-long warming center. And so that would be something that would have a significant cost, and this would be something that we might be able to reallocate those funds without having to go to council to seek additional general fund dollars. But the administration is definitely open to looking at other items with us if there's not a need to use those for that purpose. They've assured me that they would like to see that stay with us.
And why did the program close?
So we found that definitely we were not spending the funds at the rate that we anticipated. We had a couple conversations with Mountain Comp along the way to try to see if there were ways that we could improve that spend down and continue to move people into shelter. What we ultimately found is that the model was extremely difficult to operate. The individuals originally that we were targeting were those that had pets or other significant barriers to shelter. A lot of those individuals that we identified through our coordinated entry system had significant barriers, high acuity, typically no or very little income, and the model of trying to move them off of rental assistance and leasing in their own names within a matter of approximately 3 months was really proving to be not feasible. And so ultimately, we decided rather than to keep the money in a program that was clearly not going to be able to expend the amount of money within the needed timelines for ARPA, that we needed to look at making some changes. I will say that Mountain Comp did an extremely good job of making a strong effort, did work with us on trying to make some adjustments along the way. It ultimately was just a reflection of the fact that the population that we were targeting had more significant barriers than could truly be served with such short-term housing. Other questions? All right. If not, the next item on the agenda is the COC governance charter. We were required, per what's written in this document, to release a draft at least a month in advance, and this was presented in the May board meeting. We did have some questions that came out of that. One thing that was raised was the question around the fact that we presently already have board members who are serving terms. And so speaking with law, clarifying that by adopting the governance charter, the COC membership would be adopting the existing board members with their present terms. And so that would be something that really wouldn't make a change in terms of who's presently serving on the board or when they would roll off. But that per the guidelines of this document, that the membership would then have a role in selecting future board members as vacancies became available. Another question was specifically around those that would be installed onto the board. And the question was raised, since this is presently a dual designated board as the HPI board and the COC board, what theoretically could happen if the COC membership and board was to select an individual that the mayor, for example, may potentially not want to appoint. So from the perspective of law, technically, if that was something to happen, that's where we could have potentially the need either for the COC board to select a different candidate, or that could potentially be the point where the COC and HPI boards could diverge. Now, since the spirit of this draft update was to make sure that we were in full compliance with HUD. One of the primary things was to make sure that the COC membership had an active role in selecting board members. We worked to remove a lot of the language referencing LFUCG and the mayor. So from my perspective, it doesn't really make sense to then go back and reinsert references to the mayor. So I would say on that point, that's where we kind of need to have some discussion. There's a couple different strategies. One, I would just state that I have never had any of my recommendations denied or even questioned. Mayor Gordon specifically has been very receptive to listening to the expertise of this office and of this board. I'm pretty confident that that's something that would continue. If we had concerns that it might not, or that a change in administration might impact that, I still think that any mayor that would come on board in the future has a vested interest in listening to the expertise of the board. But another strategy that we had talked about in previous meetings was to have a selections committee that would potentially recommend multiple candidates, say 3 candidates, and allow the mayor to choose between those candidates for the final recommendation. You'll see on page 3 of the document that the COC board members and or whomever the COC board members designate for this purpose will review and recommend appointments based first on ensuring required membership of the COC board is maintained, and will then consider attendance and participation at COC board and committee meetings, followed by relevant personal and professional experience. Another piece of this is that we do have a lot of seats on the board that are already predetermined largely by the representation that HUD requires of a COC. For example, maintaining a seat for an individual with lived experience, maintaining a seat for an HIV/AIDS provider, maintaining a seat for a victim services provider. So this is another reason why I don't think that we would be likely to encounter any issues with our recommended appointments, because largely we're going to have to meet certain criteria in order to be in HUD compliance anyway. But definitely open to any discussion that would be around that point. The only other item that I know that we had some questions on was just on page 2, the reference to meetings occurring at least semi-annually. Again, this is something that's kind of the floor, and we go above that by meeting more frequently than that frequency. At this time, I'm going to go ahead, and this would be a full membership vote. Basically, as we discussed in the May meeting, what this would be is keeping us in compliance by updating our governance charter annually. At present, we have not updated this document since 2019. It is an item that could potentially be requested for us to submit with our continuum of care application to HUD. So it is something that we need to be mindful of getting at some point into the routine of updating annually. Additionally, that current draft would not have us in full compliance due to not having the membership making the appointments to the board. So those are 2 areas where we are presently out of compliance. But I would be open to having any conversation that's needed. This would allow the membership to go ahead and adopt symbolically the HPI board and its present members as the COC board, and to designate the OHPI as the continuum of care lead agency. Per this draft, we would be moving to vote on this in January of each calendar year. So whatever we would do today, we would still be looking at a vote in January at the January board meeting. Since this is a full membership vote, we would be able to take questions or discussion from any of the members.
So Jeff, how many seats do we have open on the board right now? And then what is the process if we want to nominate someone to the board? What does that look like?
So in terms of vacant board seats, we presently only have 1 seat that's still vacant. Amanda Bryant just filled John Parker's seat, so that leaves us with just 1 vacancy at present. And right now, as the governance charter states, it's really just up to the COC board. It doesn't go into detail as to what that looks like. Basically, I think the intent and how law drafted that was to give us the freedom, whether the board members wanted to do that or whether they wanted to appoint a designee, and that it's not necessarily specifying the actual process that the board would have to go through, but that they would be the ones to make that recommendation.
Gotcha. Okay.
Other questions or discussion? I know we all love very legal documents.
I guess I'm doing that right. Remind me again, how many total board members do we have?
So that should be 13.
13, okay. How many are at large? I know we've got designated appointments, but how many are at large? In other words, they're not designated a certain role.
I have to see if that's actually listed here. So page 3 will have some information regarding this. Of our 13 board members, membership must include at least one homeless or formerly homeless individual. Also representatives for substance use disorder providers, HIV/AIDS, veterans, chronically, well, these actually, let's see. It doesn't specify the number for each of those. It's a total pool that we can draw from. I think, I want to say all but 3 of them are designated. I can get an answer on that for you. I just didn't have it in front of me prepared for today. And keep in mind that 2 of those would be our council members. And we didn't want to try to separate out the COC and the HPI board. We didn't want to specify those within this document, but we wanted to leave the space to continue to have our council members serve. I still feel strongly that would be to the board's benefit, because that way we have some pathways to have some support within the council.
No, I agree. Okay, great. Thank you.
I don't think this is relevant for the vote today, but I want to flag that since we have the work group working on engagement of folks with lived experience in the board, I would be interested in revisiting this after that work group has established what that looks like, and possibly writing some of the outcomes of that process back into this document in the future.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions or discussion? All right. If not, would there be a motion to approve? I'm sorry. Who moved?
So moved.
Okay.
So moved.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right. And then all those in favor, this would be 1 vote per organization. So please, if you have more than 1 representative, only vote once. It's a full membership vote. If you want to raise your hand so we can kind of see visually. All right. Those opposed? All right, the motion passes. All right, that brings us down to our next regular meeting, and that is going to be September 13th here in this room at 1:30 p.m. I will just make a note that as I get back into the office, Marissa and I are working this week to review the COC NOFO, and we may have to come back to the board and membership to request potentially some special meetings along the way. Keep in mind that we'll have to, on the front end, approve our application scoring and ranking process, as well as our scoring and ranking document. And then on the back end, we'll need the board to approve both our priority listing, that would be the ranking of our subrecipients that we are going to recommend for funding, as well as to approve our completed collaborative application. I think that in terms of the back end, since the application is going to be due on September 28th, that our September 13th meeting will allow us to go ahead and approve both the priority listing and the collaborative application well in time. I think the thing that we're going to have to look at is going ahead sometime between now and the start of the competition of doing a special meeting so that we would be able to approve the application scoring and ranking process. would be glad to go ahead and hold that via Zoom if it's more convenient for everyone. But we are going to try to get you that information, hopefully into this week, early next week, just so that we can get a meeting on the calendar. That brings us to other issues and public sharing for issues not on the agenda. We are a quiet group. Does anybody have any announcements, anything they'd like to share?
I do. Daryl Strawberry is going to be our featured speaker for Night of Hope this year, and so I'm super excited about that. That's very cool. He has a great story, and if you haven't heard him speak, it will be worth the time. So October, hold on, that would have been an important thing to have ready. It is Wednesday, October 18th at the Lexington Theater, 6 o'clock. So we will send out more information as we get closer to that, but I just want to put that on your radar because it will definitely be worth your time.
Thank you. Hope you guys have a great turnout. Other events, announcements, public sharing? All right, I guess we're ready to adjourn. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Who's second?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Wow, that was easy peasy. Not for you.